Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, and thank you for joining this webinar. Hi, my name is Ali Rahman. I am the VP of Growth at Stocksy and your host for the webinar. This is our second year of bringing visual insights to our creative community. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for your encouragement and support this year. This year, again, the response has been phenomenal, so thank you all. Today, we hope to inspire and add value to your creative efforts through these insights. The Visual Insights for 2026 is our take on the visual trends and cultural aesthetics that will be shaping our creative efforts moving forward. On that note, some quick housekeeping. The recording will be sent via email. Captions are available for you to enable. Also, please do drop in your questions in the Q&A section. We'll answer them at the end. Any unanswered questions, we'll send a reply directly to you. For the uninitiated, Stocksy is a creative media cooperative. We source fresh, standout visuals that honestly reflect real life from global artists who live and love their work. All our content is human-generated and curated. We're on a mission to serve the arts and the artists. We focus on fair pay, originality, and creativity. Joining us today, we have Erica Singleton. She is a lead photo editor and a creative producer with over a decade of experience in photo direction, curation, and creative production. Her background spans editorial titles like Vanity Fair and Town and Country, as well as health and wellness platforms where she has shaped visual storytelling, both print and digital media. So welcome, Erica, to the webinar. Jen Ross, our creative director at Stocksy. With a background in art publishing, photo editing, and journalism, she has a deep understanding of art and culture. She is also a photography producer and an art director. Her experience in photography and editorial work places her in a perfect position to formulate and deliver the visual insights today. So welcome, Jen, and thanks for bringing the visual insights to us today. Then we have Boris Jovanovic. He's a contributor and an editor at Stocksy, based out in Belgrade. He's been with us for about 11 years, a photographer by trade. Boris focuses on lifestyle, portrait, and sports categories. Boris has worked with global clients like Netflix, T-Mobile, and Vodafone. With that said, and the introductions done, I'd pass it over to Jen to get us started on visual insights for 2026.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ali, and thanks everyone for being here so far. I have actually quite a bit to get through, so I'll try not to rush. But I did want to start out with just offering a bit of context about how we think about trends here at Stocksy and how we landed on this year's theme, which is Signs of Life. So trends tend to follow a pretty familiar systems arc where they start in like this state of low entropy and they're chaotic and they're unpredictable and they're not fully formed. And then as they start to establish, they gain definition and they gain complexity and they also gain energy. So in the process of this evolution, there is this threshold moment where everything is most alive with potential energy and where a system is most primed for adaptation and growth. Just like the natural world where life kind of thrives when conditions are dynamic enough to spark growth, but also stable enough to sustain it. So that's really like the sweet spot when we're looking at trends and what's emerging over the next year. It's really when, you know, an aesthetic or a look or a style or a mood is legible, but it's not fully obvious and it's nowhere near being flattened into a formula. So this is what's called like the early majority stage or the edge of chaos stage. And that's where we want to explore. So where life is happening and where life is moving the most in creativity. So we begin with ambient realism as our first insight. So, ambient realism really describes kind of like a documentary mode of production, but not in the traditional editorial rubric of like documentary realism. Simply put, and yeah, we've been saying this for years, it's just real people doing real things. And that kind of restores an authenticity, but also like a contextual integrity into commercial photography. So ambient realism is less of a singular style and more like an evolving visual attitude that we've kind of over the years had different frameworks for understanding or talking about. For example, like a couple of years ago, we were thinking about it more as like user generated content aesthetic, and then lo-fi media or varieties of amateur, social, or vernacular photography. So this year we're kind of evolving our thinking about it and pulling all of those permutations into what we're calling ambient realism. And this kind of describes how photography scope reaches further and further into the everyday, and really past the iconic scenes and those decisive moments, and more into like the subtlest stream and the substance of everyday life. So it's neither digital nor natively digital or analog, but it does often translate more potently on film media, just given the association with like personal snapshots, family albums. And really what makes this aesthetic so resonant is that it takes the shape and the texture of our own memories, and the same contents of our own camera rolls, which as everyone here at Stocksy knows, in my case, is a lot of cats. So, before social media, photography had to work a lot harder to find an audience, and the audience was sensitive to professional technique. But as a result of everybody having a tool in their pocket for like seeing the communicative potential of the world and as an expressive substance, then it kind of has radically shifted our expectations of how we represent life through photography. And so, now things like selfies or receipts or accidental screen grabs, or, a million photos of our pets and babies and photogenic meals, they convey this kind of special type of poetry. And it's really in the imperfections that kind of capture this energy of life, which is constantly in motion. It's busy, it's messy, it's alive. It's the wrong object in focus, or tilted horizons, or finger smudges on lenses. And through this candid and raw essence, and also kind of the sheer ordinariness of this imagery, we're provided like this intimate and ambient awareness of the other. So yeah, marketers moving from aspirational idealism to identifiable realism. Imperfection, even messy, content is becoming a strategic choice. So that's a quote lifted from Kantar Media Trends and Pub Predictions, Realism and Brand Storytelling. And then we have Instagram's Creative Insights from 2025 that report a 42% increase in viral reels that were shot on analog film or use like film style LUTs, 235% growth in searches for vintage camera filter on Pinterest. So vintage filters are very much still alive and well. And then 65% of Gen Z say they prefer creators who don't take themselves too seriously. Yeah, something that we're all pretty aware of, that consumers want authentic connections with brands, and that real users resonate more deeply. And a couple of industry examples from campaigns out in the wild. So this is Polaroid's like wildly popular campaign, The Camera for an Analog Life, which you might be familiar with already. And here's just another really nice example of this aesthetic, but used in a digital ad placement. Okay, so now we're moving on to something entirely different, which is what we're calling hyperchromatic. we drew naming inspiration basically from Kodachrome, which is a low ISO film stock that, because it has really high sensitivity, it needs a lot of light, but it also renders images with really like rich, dense color, and with a sharpness as well. So we're pairing that conceptually with chrome in the literal sense of like the glossy protective finish that gives objects polish. And together these references frame an aesthetic that's basically highly stylized hyperrealism. If that makes any sense. I know that's a paradox. So, this is a visual style that's defined by clarity and brightness and contrast. Color and light are doing the heavy lifting. It blends like a studio rigor, but with like a pop art sensibility. So bold compositions, graphic simplicity, and often like a subtle wink of satire. First thematic expression of this is clarity that really breathes. And I think it's quite important to make a distinction that we're not talking about this, like the crushed shadows and the blown out highlights that we kind of associate or we're familiar with like this modern high contrast edit. It's more like it's much more warm and generous, and the clarity is really like the crispness of looking through really clean air. The contrast is snappy, but not harsh, and the blacks still feel true and rich, and highlights hold their detail. It has punch, but there's still like a softness in how tones render. And then, so while color is doing a lot of structural work, lighting is really sculptural. So high key lighting, saturated hues, and sharp precision make images feel really vibrant and clean, but also dimensionally intact. So in total, it's the look of confidence and immediacy. The tone is modern and commercial. It's optimistic and it's playful, and also is really highly legible. So in an attention scarce environment, these images read instantly. They translate really well on screens. They're good at stopping thumbs and feeds basically, and they signal energy and freshness. Okay, so hard flash photography, high saturation and overexposed lighting, rooted in nostalgia, but turned up to 11. And so here are a few different statistics about dopamine filters from TikTok trends. High performing social ads tested by Adobe use high chroma color palettes, and Gen Z survey, 68% said they're drawn to visuals that feel loud and chaotic and intensely colorful. This is just a quote from the artist Maurizio Catalan from his book Chromotherapy. And I just really like how he talks about color as therapy, and that, it is a history of the world of imagination, and it's flirting with pop culture and surrealism, bling, camp, kitsch, and the bizarre. If you're familiar with Poppy, this is a really good example of a brand that uses this, and their ad was actually the most highest engaged with ad placement in the last Super Bowl. So they're doing super well. Something a little bit more richer for Mamba by Shuka. And then Jenny's, which is a little bit more of it's more of a pullback example, but still has that playfulness in the color. It's sort of very subtle kind of retro vibe as well. Okay, so moving on. High concept chaos is basically like the offspring of the two previous aesthetics, where you have high concept, high production value, creativity, but it's colliding with a looser style, a more relaxed technique, and an immersive, in the moment point of view. These are styled worlds, but they're deliberate and artful while still managing to feel candid and unbuttoned. So when we talk about campaign polish, what we mean is that the elements, the stylistic elements, the production elements like models, wardrobe, lighting, location, these are all highly considered with end use in mind. So compositions, copy space, contrast framing, they're all kind of built to flex across different formats like banners, hero images, social props, out-of-home advertising, etc. But even with that level of planning and comprehensive shot list, I'm sure the final images, they still manage to feel loose and improvisational and unrestrained. So yeah, it's a sweet spot between technical sophistication and artful execution, but like this informal gaze. And once all of those parameters are in place, then you can see that the creativity actually really starts to breathe. And the result is dynamic and much more human. And it's just kind of like a choreographed looseness where the setup is tight, but the energy remains free. And then angles, untraditional angles are having a big resurgence. So, we're seeing a lot of distortion and wide lenses, Dutch angles, fisheyes, 35mm focal length. These are all heavily back in rotation. And what they're doing is they kind of bring like this tension and a sense of presence that cuts against the neutrality of standard commercial framing. And it's sort of like tilting the world slightly off its axis and giving you the feeling that people are really having fun in their creativity and creation. Brands are using high-end production values to create immersive, chaotic, sometimes disorienting visual experiences. It's not messy by accident, it's a new kind of mastery, and that's from the Future Laboratories Unreality macro trend for 2024. I'm going to just kind of skip over reading out all of these statistics because just in the interest of time, and they're all in the report, which you can download after this. Yeah, chaotic angles, flash burn lighting, it's surrealist distortion, it's maximalist, but it's also highly intentional. That's from Dazed into the Future Laboratory. And let's see a few industry examples. So we really liked this one by Big Cartel, Brand Fresh by How and How. And so you can kind of see how, this is feeling pretty like raw and candid, but also it's feeling contemporary and it's still feeling premium. And it does have like this eclecticism about it. Moving on to Body High. What we're seeing, the return to presence. Over the past year, we've really seen this percolating in so many places. An interest in what's real, a craving for immediacy and for presence and for physical authenticity. Media theorists they're calling this the post-digital turn, which is basically like a tipping point where we're sort of reorienting ourselves back to the natural world. And a report from WGSN called this the renaissance of the real. While there's this surface level overlap with kind of like new age touch grass sustainability themes, it's quite a different diversion in a couple of ways. Like the wellness industry has been, so dominated by like fitness and spas and beauty and nutrition and mindfulness, which is all very much about the focus on the self. Whereas this is more of a shift to like a community-minded materialism, an investment in the physical and in the living world with other people and with other animals and other organisms. It's attention to physical experience and to the sensory beauty of being alive and having a body. And yeah, we see it showing up in quite diverse ways that might not seem immediately connected, like the swelling of in-person events thrown by like brands and organizations and conferences, again, music festivals, dinner parties, even things like line dancing clubs and book clubs, gardening, cooking, plants, the rise of dumb tech, and even things like the increased enrollment in vocational education. So yeah, in summary, it's like this moment of kind of grounding, a collective urge to tether ourselves to something that is real. Our media discourse is so saturated with talking about technology, and our social platforms feel so engineered to defenestrate us from a really shared sense of reality. So we're reaching for like these organic connections to things that seem to hold an elemental wisdom. So things like mushrooms and minerals and crystals and breath work. Yeah, so as High Snobiety and List reports, a move towards rituals of the flesh, dance, sweat, celebration, real touch. It's not just about digital detox, it's about full physical immersion, which I think is a great summary. There's a quote from the New Yorker writer Kyle Shaker that when he talks about us entering into an era of life culture, he says, we desperately want to know and to be reassured what is in front of us is real. This is a pretty sweet example by the Bearberry brothers where they had like this pizza picnic in the park with their community and clients. Here is a landing page for Champ de Fleur, which is a holistic wellness and healing site. And then Seed Probiotics is a company that's like gaining a lot of attention, and in their visuals are really connecting human health to the natural world. And then Bloom is a mushroom company, and yeah, you can see that they're plugging biomass with like this blue sky optimism that we're seeing a lot of recently. And lastly, that kind of takes us to Revenge Living. This actually does share, it shares principles of embodiment and connection as covered in the previous insight. But then it kind of layers on this, for lack of better words, like just a fuck it attitude or operating system for dealing with contemporary life. And, it's like if the future is so uncertain, the only logical response is to live intensively and beautifully and for now. In the recent years, pessimism has definitely become like this ambient noise, and what we're really starving for at this moment is like optimism and pleasure and play and joy. Really like the things that make life worth living. It's no secret that if there is a golden formula for what will always move us, or also what will sell things, it's joy and pleasure. And the pleasure imperative really taps into how we're hardwired for play, but like counter programmed for like work and worry and anxiety and seriousness also. And then part of this the rebellion is like a freedom from the imposed urgency and heaviness built into like our lives and our jobs, and from advertising that's engineered to keep us like in this constant CTA mindset. So this attitude kind of also has a subversive moral coding where at first glance it might seem like hedonism or naive or just like a palliative coping mechanism for a world that seems to be collapsing, but it's a strategic kind of indulgence, releasing us from like this blindly virtuous cycle of productivity and optimization and polycrisis and the commodification of social life that late stage capitalism has very much foisted us into. So we're going to see a lot more of like adult silliness, a lot more socializing without phones, having fun, just being unhinged, and like humor and fun is like a psychological clearinghouse for the other burdens of gravity and excess and moralizing and clutter, things that kind of lock us into static patterns of thinking and behavior. And then it's also about slowing down, like slow travel, slow food, slow living. I don't know if you've heard of like revenge travel or, but revenge lifestyle is basically what you could call chaos comfort. Small luxuries, spontaneous trips, like beautiful objects, little treats, play, the audacity to be unproductive and still feel good about it. So, revenge living is reclaiming a slowness as an act of defiance, and a choice to savor rather than accelerate. Because in this moment, as Calvin Tompkins said, or his book title, living well is the best revenge. Yeah, so, as a WGSN and Spotify report said, when everything feels heavy, the lighthearted becomes radical, and playfulness is re-emerging as a survival strategy, and joy as a political act. Again, more stuff about ritualized indulgence, and joy as armor, pleasure becoming an aesthetic and a strategy. And here's an example from Flamingo Estate that threw together like harvest feasts and dinner parties and Jim Beam ads encouraging people just to get out and actually socialize in real life. Similar ads from Stella Artois and Heineken have been in the news lately. And then Depop, just kind of a loose energy and sort of an attitude of abandon. And then also here are a couple of examples where it's just like being out in the world and capturing a little bit of that gritty energy associated with it too. So yep, wrapping up you know, this year we really wanted to kind of talk about the things that are, you know, it's not just about following trends, it's about noticing the ones that follow us and the ones that seem to be really insistent. And just to kind of point it back to what I began with in terms of like where we're looking at things is that, you know, at the edge of chaos, the signals are the clearest. You can understand why something resonates, not just that it exists. The noise is still low, so it hasn't been colonized by brands, algorithms, or mass templates. It hasn't collapsed into formula, so the rules are still emerging. It's still honest enough to carry human texture, and it still speaks from creativity rather than commercial replication. And most importantly, you can shape the narrative rather than chase it. So with that, I want to invite our two guest speakers to join me, because at Stocksy, we're a team of like curators and editors, and we work very closely with clients, and so much of our intelligence comes from our community and our contributors who are out there in the world creating work. So that's why we wanted to also bring a client and also a contributor into the conversation. So welcome, Boris and Erica.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us.
All right, I'm going to throw a question at you. So when you look at these insights, which one maybe is like the closest to home for you, and in which ways it might have shown up in your own work?
I'll go ahead first. What resonates for me is Body High. I think because it really celebrates something, the body being lived in and experienced through, rather than just something that's looked at, as an object. And it's rooted in embodiment, movement, sensation, joy, even rest, instead of perfection or performance. And I think that there's an emotional honesty there that aligns with how wellness culture has been shifting towards really more accessible, raw, lived experiences. So I think for brands and wellness, lifestyle, outdoor spaces, this kind of imagery really builds trust because it feels really inclusive and human. So that's the one for me that stands out the most.
Awesome, thank you. What about you, Boris?
First of all, yeah, I want to first say that the presentation looks amazing, and what I want to emphasize is that the whole presentation is made from the Stocksy collection, which additionally looks more beautiful. And in terms of the question, I kind of have a mixed couple of things that I can mention, which is, for me, I think the hyper stylized visuals with chaotic angles on top with the flash burn and surrealist distortion, and then ambient realism and immersive angles. I think we need to find a way to put that in one word. But from my perspective, like some of the sports campaigns I worked on, it's more and more coming into this raw aesthetic where the movement is noticeable, and then the wide angles are really prominent, and I can see the clients are really looking for those wide angles. And whenever you show a couple of photos with the wide angle, everybody gets really excited. And then I think with those wide angles, you can get closer to your models and get that whole like emotions and everything transferred to audience. And I myself, I love to use the wide angle. I think I think I rarely put anything around 50. It's either from 15 to 35 and then just 70 to 200 for portraits, or if you need like a detail or something. And I'm glad that the wide angles are more present. And I mean, of course, you can't use it in each frame, but yeah, sometimes it's a great opportunity to get closer. What I can also see, the flash is more present, and I know sometimes it's like, is it a trend or not a trend? But I think the flash was present always, and everybody, like I myself, I always use it, but then it's more like a direct flash is here, then you have a point and shoot camera, mix it with a film, and then I think it's something that's really now around us. I think you can be, again, you can get that more intimate feeling if you use a flash with a film camera, and it's like we're hanging around and then, hey, snap a photo. But I think more and more clients are mixing that up. I know from my perspective also, when I create for Stocksy, I do shoot film and digital. And sometimes those film photos, if they're really good, I love them even more than majority of the digital work. But it's also on the client side, when you work with, even with the bigger productions, sometimes it's better to mix it up. I think it's good for your own exercise, let's say, for practicing something new.
Yeah. And has this also changed kind of the way that you create work in terms of like how you relate to the models, or, you know, are you able to feel a little bit more integrated into the production instead of like you're the photographer and you're taking in, you know, shooting people who are, you know, disassociated from you being there, sort of thing?
It has changed a lot, and especially with the wide angle, I love to be in front of them. It gets them off guard sometimes, and you are communicating more, because if you're not communicating and standing in front of somebody, especially when you say you want to do a 15 mil portrait and you get a camera in front of their eyes, and they're like, what's happening? And then sometimes you get a really spontaneous laugh. And then you're like, wait a moment, and you pull out a point and shoot film camera, and then they start laughing, and that's the moment. If you have it, it's gorgeous, because it really gets them off guard, because nobody gets you serious with a point and shoot, and a good point and shoot like keeps the campaign rolling, which is beautiful. Like one of the recent shoots for a sports brand was half digital, half film, and sometimes you just couldn't tell which is which, because if you nail them, it's beautiful.
You're going to say something like, and then you pull like a balloon animal out of your pocket.
Oh, that's a trick you can always use, or a bad joke. I think I'm excellent with bad jokes, and then it's either they don't know what to do, and they just laugh. So.
Yeah. Or like Bob Ross had a pocket squirrel in his pocket when he painted. Okay, next question. So over the years, what kind of visual instincts or themes have you felt like have just like kind of refused to fade away? And you know, you just feel like they keep on resurfacing, and they seem to have like this really entrenched longevity. Erica.
Okay. Yeah, so I think an instinct that never really fades, similar to what you all are already talking about, is the trend of the ambient realism, this candid, you know, point and shoot, disposable camera, you know, aesthetic, and these lived in visual moments. And I think to your point, Boris, it can be so disarming, you know, to be photographed with something that like a point and shoot camera. And it does create these moments that just feel so candid, so raw. And there's nostalgia, I think, embedded into this aesthetic as well, because it feels like photos that we grew up with, you know, family photo albums, you know, the one shot that someone took because film was so limited at the time. So it takes shape, you know, I love how you said, you know, it does take shape in our own memories. Jen, I know you said that during the presentation. And I think there's something that's really beautifully human about, you know, this era of mainstream amateur photography, where the compositions were so loose and imperfect and not over-directed. So it wasn't, you know, and before all this digital, it wasn't about taking 1,000 versions of the same moment. You know, you got what you got. And because of that, the image, you know, the images carry this emotional honesty. And I think that we're time and time again, we're reverting back to finding this emotional honesty as a way to be communicating with audiences. So in a good way, I think ambient realism will continue to keep resurfacing because we just connect to it really instinctively, and it feels so familiar and trustworthy. Especially now when we've been through an era where images were so overly polished, or, you know, we're now living in an AI edited or AI world of imagery sometimes as well. So the candid, slightly messy authenticity, cuts through all of that and feels so much more real.
I love that. Yeah, thanks for articulating it so well.
And I can add to that, when you said that the client has too many options and you're repeating and repeating images, sometimes you get in the clash with a client because they're not happy with 500 images you took because the first one is great. And then everything else is like models getting tired, you're like, you just want to finish. And with the film, sometimes you have like 3 rolls or 5 rolls and you just, okay, we need to nail it. We're going to look at it later, which I think it's a really good point. And just to add to the AI and everything, I think we are going to see more and more the realness. And for my question here, I again have a mix of everything, which is accidental documentary, life in moments, and real and intimate, which is, I mean, I think everything sums up to that natural moment, intimacy, and I mean, that's it. Like, I don't want to sound cliche, but I would say that having the most natural moment, it's, if either directed or by accident, will never fade.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think especially in this era of all artificial, either intelligence or, it's like, even on a client shoot, you need to work on your like directing skill. So you need to be able to direct the model to be more relaxed and more just to capture the essence and get that intimacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now on the flip side, I want to ask you, what have you felt really shifting? And this could be dramatically or it could be subtly in recent years.
I can go ahead again. So I think this visual maximalism that is outlined in the hyperchromatic trend. So this sort of maximalism, boldness, and I think it's really fun. It's definitely reminiscent of the late 90s, Y2K, some K-pop culture, like all mixing together into something that's really colorful and has really interesting angles, and it's loud on purpose. And I think that this also directly ties to social media behavior because, as we all know, attention is the most valuable commodity. And so, images aren't just competing with each other. They're now competing with endless feeds, inboxes, notifications, video content. So I think we're seeing photography also responding to that environment. And I think all of these trends, that they all sort of tie together as making these sort of stop the scroll statements in them. And so, colors that are jolting you a little, compositions that maybe feel a little bit off kilter, things that just interrupt. There's like a visual disruption to them, and I think that we will continue to see that more and more as social media and the decentralization of media accelerates. It's going to be more about this visual disruption and grabbing attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can just confirm, like, I agree with Erica, like advertising needs to connect to audience, and in the massive production and everything, we're going to see more and more photography that needs to stop you, like everybody's scrolling, seeing the ads on the highway. So I agree on that. And I think we're going to see less polished ads and something getting closer to lived in aesthetic. But it all turns out to the previous questions, I think, that to sum it up.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. I did want to leave some time for just if the audience has any questions to ask you while we're all here.
Absolutely, Jen, and thank you all. Really informative. You've got some audience questions, and I'll just pass them to the panel, and one of you or all of you can participate in that. So the first question is, for the first key insight, ambient realism, what do you think is becoming a strategic choice at this time and place for us as a culture?
Yeah, very good question. And I think there's a lot of overlapping layers to this. There is somewhat of a withdrawal from total digital immersion, and this is also running into nostalgia for something that's like more lived in, more emotionally has more emotional integrity. I mean, we've kind of experienced this last decade of social media being so performative and losing touch a little bit with, you know, how things can flow in life and just the way that they can accumulate, but also an aggregate. This is kind of like a a picture, a collective picture of like how we're all living our lives in very similar ways. I think that is also like, you know, when you look at anybody's like camera roll, we're all taking pictures of the same things. Like I mean, with some variation, but you know, like the themes are very clear, and so we can relate to it, and we can also, you know, this is also channeling our attention. Like, what are we paying attention to that's right in front of us? Whether it is what we're looking at out the window, or if we're taking pictures of our cat sleeping, you know, it's just like it translates basically what is captivating us, what's right in front of us, and then how we share that with other people as well. So I think culturally, it's like this also, like this, we have this documentary mindset, and we also have this huge urge to communicate and to share with other people. So I think that aesthetic is also kind of a product of those two things.
I can add that I think it's also that we are all saturated so much of the whole digital content, and that we more connect with either analog and more nostalgia vibe.
Yeah, and I'll just add as well, you know, with trends, we often see these sort of pendulum swings. You know, we kind of go in extreme in one direction, then we go extreme in another, and so I think that there is always this flow, and so this is just where we're flowing in this moment. I think things will change again, perhaps we don't really know where, and then it may swing back to something that's. I think ambient realism will continue to show up, as we've talked about, but I think that there is a little bit of a rebellion right now to this over polish, like we've been talking about, and so that's why now it's becoming a strategy in this moment.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question. I'll try to sort of squeeze that in. And it feels like Boris, this question may be appropriate for yourself, and you can start off and we can go from there. So the question is, I love the new mastery verbiage regarding the real life moments. We see these trends in brand campaigns and end use cases, but how much are you seeing these new trends leading to licensing, which I would assume here purchase? And how do you advise balancing a unique stylistic storytelling approach that could be hyper-specific and limiting with more generally applicable styles and themes?
I think we shouldn't, as I said, as contributors and everybody that contribute photographs, I think we shouldn't change our style too much, and I think we should slowly just try in a couple of these things. Like if you're let's say creating a big lifestyle shoot, you should try including a film, including a couple of these things, like navigating through, like at the end, if you have a great moment, it's going to be licensed probably. And I think that's the key. Not everybody can do flash nor like any specific themes. I think we should just keep trying to, once you're organizing a shoot, it should be, you can write down everything you want to achieve and then slowly start building on top of that. And I think a good image at the end, it's going to be licensed, a good moment. I hope I answered it at least partially.
Yeah, I have one thing to add to that as well, which is just usability. I think with the more narrative rich content, sometimes it can be a little bit busy for how it needs to perform on a screen or in a certain format. So I think just as you're approaching the work, then you're also thinking, okay, I'll do a vertical and a wide, and I will also maybe step back so I can get some more copy space here, and just like the more variation that you can incorporate. And so you're still like, you're not being too overly directorial, but just kind of thinking about how to set up where your perspective is for basically like maximum versatility of use.
I would add on top of that, like it's always better to have a wider scene, even just to cover more than always going vertical, horizontal, like photograph horizontal and just move on.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, you know, as a photo editor, one of the biggest challenges that we have is finding that hero image that works for all different dimensions. So landscape, portrait, also square, also perhaps, you know, small banner, these really narrow banners. So having a variety from a shoot can be really, really helpful, not only for a continuity across whatever campaign a brand may be building, but even to just try to imagine as you're doing your shoot, what could be a hero image that perhaps could work in all these different dimensions? And can that be something, at least one thing to take away from this shoot, to add that variety that will appeal to clients that are licensing stock imagery?
Fantastic. I think we have just time for one last question, and if we can just make it a quick rapid fire round, and we can wrap up the webinar. So just quickly, what trends are you seeing people moving away from in the past couple of years, whether it's brands or photographers and creators? So just a quick answer, whatever comes to mind. Start with Jen, and then we can go Eric and Boris.
It's kind of a very specific trend that's kind of like fake candid. So and it really is something that you can spot immediately, and it was popular because it was also like, when it is kind of more choreographed, then there's more like color blocking, and it didn't matter so much that it wasn't fully believable. But yeah, just like seeing that shift into like, okay, but how can we take those principles, because realistically we're still needing to set up this scene, but like make it a little bit more natural and approachable, and just loosening things up and not using like a lot of things that kind of signal like inauthenticity, like fake plants, or people who you're like, they don't look like they're too old to be hanging out that way, or just those kind of like small details that I think people had a higher threshold for that inauthenticity in the past. And yeah, I feel like that threshold is lowering.
Good.
Rising.
That great answer. Erica?
Yeah,
Short,
similar.
one word.
I think things that are over directed. So to your point of
Over-directed, yeah.
fake smiles or overly posed. And I think that we are definitely moving very fast away from that.
And
Great.
I would
Boris?
add ultra polished face, like ultra polished retouching on skin.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
Okay.
moving away.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Great. We have a few unanswered questions, and we'll get in touch with the participant directly with the response. So I just want to say thank you all to our speakers and our participants for joining the event. We'd love to hear more about your creative needs and how we can partner with you. So you can scan that QR code. We leave it on the screen for a while and get in touch with us. You'll also be receiving the recording of the webinar and also the Visual Insights report next week via email. And again, thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you on our next webinar. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.